Welcome to Econ 102, where economist Noah Smith and I make sense of what's happening in the news, technology, business, and beyond through the lens of economics. Let's jump right in.
Hello, good to see you.
Hey, nice to meet you, Noah, and nice to see you, Eric.
Hey.
Yeah. Katherine, thank you for coming on Econ 102.
You don't look at all like my sister in person. In actuality, only that one photo looks like my sister.
Yeah, I'm the queen of misleading Twitter avatars.
Even though I'm a 15-year-old Japanese girl.
That's a good one. It's a good trick.
Noah, why don't you remind the audience of the conversation that helped inspire bringing on Katherine D, or maybe just share what you found captivating about Katherine D's expertise, and then we can get right into it.
Well, okay, so the original conversation was just about relationships, I guess. It all started when Noor Siddiqui and Steph Scher had me onto a podcast to discuss why women in tech have trouble dating. And my basic thesis was they just work too hard. And everyone works too much. But then that was there's probably a lot more to it than that, but I just don't know what it is. And I'm not very qualified to talk about this. But then I went on some giant rant. Eric, you forced me to go on some giant rant about love and relationships in one random episode, and I don't know why, but it was very popular and went viral, sort of.
Yeah.
And so we're like, well, let's get someone who talks about these things professionally to talk about these things. If we're gonna switch to a love and relationships podcast, we better get someone better than us.
Amazing.
That's a cool topic.
Katherine, how would you, for people who are unfamiliar, how would you sort of describe your expertise or interest on the topic?
So I used to have a moderately popular dating advice column in my weird eclectic body of work. E. Jean Carroll was a big fan of it when it existed. And I don't know, I talk to a lot of people, and I think my expertise comes from that just exposure.
Yeah. And so maybe let's start at the top in terms of what do you think is missing in the discourse when people, Noah brought up a potential theory why people aren't matching. What do we think people don't appreciate about dating, whether it's, looking at it, across generations, you look at Gen Z a lot, or, what do people not fully appreciate about what's happening on the dating market?
So there's multiple dating markets, I think is the big one. Your experience in New York is not your experience in San Francisco. And then the big coastal, relevant cities, right? The ones that everyone thinks of really don't reflect the dynamics in the middle of the country, or even in smaller cities within the same state. Like dating in Sacramento is probably quite different from dating in San Francisco. And I know that dating in San Jose and Sunnyvale, when I lived there, was different than San Francisco dating. So there's all these variations that I think get glossed over. If to go a step further and focus on the Bay Area, dating within tech is different than if you're not in tech. And then there's gradients within that. Like, are you in the startup scene? Are you very social? When you say you work in tech, do you work at a big company like Apple, right? So there's all these differences that I think everyone thinks that their normal is everyone else's normal. But of course, there's overarching trends. But I think when we give advice, it should be more tailored to people's more specific environments.
Okay, so that's a good insight. There are different dating markets. And if people were to ask, okay, so what is the difference between sort of San Francisco and New York, or what are the different kinds of markets, and what are the different factors that make them different? Is it sort of sex ratio, or what makes them different markets? Is it the type of people that are in them, the personality traits,
it's everything, right? I think the big sort of elephant in the room that I think people know is there but don't really mention, frankly, is class. And not just wealth, but also where are you in the social hierarchy of your scene? If some people in San Francisco, their dating market or their dating pool rather, are high earners who are maybe even a little bit famous, even within their own sort of world. And that's a very different experience than dating in the middle or working class. So I think that's really the big one, especially with gender war conversation, dating discourse, capital D, two capital Ds, right?
How about San Francisco versus New York specifically, would you say?
So I think it depends on where you lie in that landscape. People in San Francisco, I think, I mean, are not so. If we're looking at sort of people with these like more prestigious jobs, I would say like it's slightly easier as a woman in San Francisco. I know that's an unpopular opinion, but I think that even though maybe the men are more awkward or something, like it's much easier to find someone who is stable across like multiple axes in the Bay Area than New York, where people are like more in creative careers and there's a little bit more precarity. I also think the expectations of people's appearances are different from city to city. This is something that is sort of whispered about, but not really explicitly said. Like who's considered hot in Miami and again, San Francisco and New York, and then even just throwing in a wild card there, like San Jose. Those are all very different things, and you can get away with one kind of look in one place and not the other. And I think that also applies to men. Like, what are the expectations for men and women in these particular cities?
So you're saying there could be an arbitrage opportunity?
Yeah, of course, right? And this was something that people were joking about when there was like the migration to Miami, right? Like the women there are so beautiful, but it depends on your taste.
And they may have a different value set or sort of interest set. And so is it true that like 30% of men, are under 30 aren't having sex or whatever? Like what do we make of the not having sex thing? What exactly is happening there?
I think a lot of people are sort of antisocial. They're going out as much. There's a lot of arguments over like, to what extent did Me Too impact this? And I'm sure it did create, I don't want to say a culture of fear because I don't want to like invalidate anyone's, but I think that a culture of caution and perhaps overcorrection is, one of the downstream effects of Me Too. So there's that, but there's also like COVID lockdowns, I think make, charitably, people got used to just doing nothing, right? Just lying down, communicating over text message. And socializing is a muscle, right? If you're not regularly socializing, it's uncomfortable when you get back into it. And I think here's another difference between even Chicago, where I am, and San Francisco. When I lived in the Bay Area, I was always going out all the time. There was always a party. There's always something happening. People are a little bit more reserved in Chicago. Not that there aren't people who are, going out all the time, but my particular social circles aren't, right? So there's a question of like, what is the cultural scene like in your immediate environment that I think also plays a pretty big role.
Do you think that there will be some sort of great reset and just sort of pendulum swing, the sort of like post Me Too, post COVID, slutification, sort of Trump's in office, now I'm just teasing, but or do you think that this is just, like a durable trend?
I mean, it depends on, I think for some people, yes, there is also like a backlash to being too online. I've noticed people are moving into the offline world, into physical reality, and every sort of current thing, I think, is just another chip like being online. Like I think each event that happens just pushes people away from the internet. And what that might do is for certain populations, they may start socializing more and people may start having more sex. But I also think a lot of people were just kind of broken by lockdown and maybe don't have the opportunities to socialize that they would like to. I mean, lockdown didn't only impact us psychologically, but like, for example, in a lot of cities, a lot of bars closed, or it created a weird dynamic where like the rents changed. And so there's like bars constantly cycling out, not just bars, but also bookstores, more like subcultural hangout spots, more general third places. So some people are left in kind of this, they have to make their own table. They have to make their own social scene. And I don't know how many people would be willing to do that.
Yeah. Noah, can you imagine going to college during the COVID era?
I'm glad I didn't have to do that.
Insane time.
Yeah, no, that'd be very disheartening. I don't know. I also feel that when I went to college, there was more of a cult of college because we didn't really have social media yet. There was this idea that that's when you're going to meet all the people who are in your class and who, you're going to fall in love. You're going to meet your best friends. You're going to have all the, new experiences, blah, blah, blah. And I think that social media has sort of disintermediated a lot of that stuff so that you can do that stuff without college more easily. I mean, you could back in the day too, but I think that college was special institutionally because, it collated. It was university. It brought all these people together, that in a way nothing else did. And now social media does that. And so I think that it hasn't completely disintermediated it, but people really thought, I need to have the best 4 years of my life in college. And a lot of people were like, actively sad and depressed that if those years didn't go perfectly. And so, well, I mean, for me, I was depressed because my mom randomly died right when I was starting college, but that was different. Anyway, but yeah, so I think that was a big deal. Now it's becoming less important. I don't know. I feel like I meet, when I meet young people, like, do you know Anson Yu, sort of famous kid?
Yeah.
Yeah, Anson, she's like, she goes to Waterloo with a lot of the other Waterloo kids. And actually a lot of the Waterloo kids that I talk to, they like their college. They like the people they meet at college, but they don't feel that that's like the main thing. They think the main thing of their youth is like going to a city and meeting people, in real life, using the internet as a tool to find people in real life, but then coming together in real life. So those are pretty much the only like Zoomers I know. I mean, how about you, Eric? What do you think?
I mean, I know Zoomers, and I sort of hear similar things to what I'm hearing from Katherine D, which is it was a pretty demoralizing time, and you never get that time back. And yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that has some sort of durable effects on people's willingness to be social or sort of put themselves out there or sort of have developed, that sort of set of resilience, social resilience that college can teach. And just be way more online.
It's something, that Noah reminded me of is it used to be that social media was a supplement to your college experience. Like you would be in a Facebook group with your graduating class or something like that. And now it feels like you use social media to meet a subculture or a particular network of people that you want to be involved with. And that is a big difference. When I first started using social media, it was really to meet people in my immediate environment. And then I think the time I used it most intensely outside of, now, right, was like Facebook groups when I was getting ready to go to college. And I remember like joining like graduating class of like the 3 different schools I thought I was going to go to. And then, I would leave and, stay in the one of the school that I did end up going to. And then there was like a secrets page, right, where people would post like things they overheard or secrets and confessions if people went to the school. And something that's interesting is, right when Facebook was starting up, a lot of schools had similar sites that were just for the school, right? It was here, and it was social media, which made it different from other, internet assisted platforms that had existed decades prior. But like Columbia had a sort of Facebook clone. I think NYU had something similar. And all of these were just designed to help connect people who may not have otherwise met because they weren't in the same class or something.
We'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors. There are over 1.5 million nonprofit organizations in the United States and millions more around the world. How do you know which ones can make the biggest impact with your donation? GiveWell was founded to help donors with that exact question. They pore over independent studies and charity data to help donors direct their funds to evidence-backed organizations that are saving and improving lives. GiveWell has now spent over 17 years researching charitable organizations and only directs funding to a few of the highest impact opportunities they've found. Over 100,000 donors have used GiveWell to donate more than $2 billion. Rigorous evidence suggests that these donations will save over 200,000 lives and improve the lives of millions more. GiveWell wants as many donors as possible to make informed decisions about high-impact giving. You can find all of their research and recommendations on their site for free. You can make tax-deductible donations to their recommended funds or charities, and GiveWell doesn't take a cut. If you've never used GiveWell to donate, you can have your donation matched up to $100 before the end of the year, or as long as matching funds last. To claim your match, go to givewell.org and pick podcast and enter Econ 102 with Noah Smith and Eric Torenberg at checkout. Make sure they know that you heard about GiveWell from Econ 102 to get your donation matched. Again, that's givewell.org to donate or find out more.
What does the future hold for business? Ask 9 experts and you'll get 10 answers. It's a bull market. It's a bear market. Rates will rise or fall. Can someone invent a crystal ball? Until then, over 40,000 businesses have future-proofed their business with NetSuite by Oracle, the #1 cloud ERP, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, and HR into one fluid platform.
With one unified business management suite, there's one source of truth, giving you the visibility and control you need to make quick decisions. With real-time insights and forecasting, you're peering into the future with actionable data. When you're closing the books in days, not weeks, you're spending less time looking backwards and more time on what's next. If I had needed this product, it's what I'd use. Whether your company is earning millions or even hundreds of millions, NetSuite helps you respond to your immediate challenges and seize your biggest opportunities. Speaking of opportunity, download the CFO's Guide to AI and Machine Learning at netsuite.com/102. The guide is free to you at netsuite.com/102. That's netsuite.com/102.
What about talk a little bit about the culture of trad, speaking of social media? Is this kind of just an elite kind of defection? Is this a moment in time? Or, was this just an aesthetic thing that people actually weren't living out? Or is it just the beginning of something, maybe a sort of reaction or backlash against a certain sex positivity, virility, or something that they see? What do you think about this?
I think the trad movement is like a lot of wishful thinking. I think it does exist in shades, and it's definitely, it definitely was like an aesthetic movement or online subculture. I think it's since faded. But the backlash we see is more gender war-y, right? It's rad femmes, maybe that word is being used a little bit too liberally, or self-identified misandrous. And for men, so people have talked about this ad nauseum, right? They're not, they don't like the way women live. I think, again, like the most charitable interpretation is there's men who are, I don't want to use the word disgusted, but I guess the word is disgusted. They're disgusted by what they perceive as contemporary femininity. And sometimes it's as extreme as like straightforward sexism and misogyny. And sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it's just like, I don't want to disrespect myself by giving my time or my money or my virginity to a woman who doesn't see me as a person. And that's maybe not necessarily what's actually happening, but it's what they perceive as a situation. And I think there's shade. It's a continuum on both sides, right? There's who straightforwardly hate men, and there are men who straightforwardly hate women, but not everyone is that extreme. There's more moderate people, but wherever you lie on that spectrum, there is a sense of separateness, I think.
Is the sex recession real, or is that hype?
I think that's real. Right? I think there's been a lot of surveys on it. But
I will tell you that a few months ago, I went to a wedding with a bunch of Gen X guys who are like, they're all like 5 years older than me. I'm an older millennial, but 5 years older than me is Gen X. And then those guys were so horny. I couldn't believe how horny those guys, those guys are like in their mid 40s, and they're like, they are insanely horny, much hornier than any young people that I meet. Okay, not any, most, but then it's like night and day. They're just thinking and talking about sex constantly. And then I sort of remember this is the way people were when like I was a teenager listening to people in like their 20s talk about life. Like this is how they talked, and this is what I thought people were like. And then it sort of went away, and I didn't notice it until now. There's been a generational shift, and I think the boomers were insanely horny too, like, and just sort of took it for granted that this is how human beings are. And like something happened somewhere in the middle of the millennial generation, or maybe even starting with my like mini generation. Something happened, and obviously RFK people are going to be like, it was the seed oil or some shit, but like it was the internet, wasn't it?
I mean, I think that's a part of it, right? Because there's all sorts of theories that are floated that I think have various levels of truth, right? Like where more people are in SSRIs and other types of psychiatric medications, and that impacts. But also, people are sedentary. They're much more sedentary, and obviously, lockdowns only amplified this. And if you're not moving your body, you become out of touch with your body. So I don't know if we can say it's the internet purely, like we're all being mentally hijacked. I think there's all these other little things that just seem so obvious that we take for granted. It just like here's another one, like Uber Eats, right? Like even for myself, like I would walk half a mile or whatever to go to a cafe and pick up a coffee in the morning. That would be like my fun little routine and treat. And that's like, if it's too cold or something, it's like, oh, I could just get it delivered, and it's $12, and it's like, why not? who gives a fuck, right? Like that's nothing. And so but that's
Still what? I don't know.
but that's like that's that's a mile missing from like the amount that I'm moving around each day. And for other people, it's probably like much more extreme, right? There's just like no movement.
I'm going back to the rad fem stuff for a second. So on in the feminism sort of discourse, is it fair to say that reactionary feminism is also a sort of wishful thinking and sort of losing out, significantly to sex positive feminism or even career based or like, what's the latest in feminism? What's winning? What's going to win?
I think people are very skeptical of liberal feminism. So that this is a little bit reductive, but just like an easy shorthand, like the girl boss sort of stuff, consent based, sex positive, things like this. They're much more skeptical of that, I think. I don't know if that's true, but just from my own experience, reactionary feminism, I think, does appeal to some people, but I don't think it's as popular as something that it's not quite radical feminism, but it looks more like radical feminism. I wouldn't underestimate how skeptical of anything, even with a patina of conservatism, young people are. I think with men, it's a little bit different, but I think a lot of women, they don't want to be associated with the right. And they also don't feel like the right represents their interests, even if there are like feminist or woman, centric elements to it, right? Like abortion is a big issue. Reactionary feminism doesn't really have room for abortion. Neither does Catholic feminism. It should go without saying. It's basically in the name. And they might be more willing to make concessions with liberal feminism, even if they're also skeptical of the sex industry. So that's like another big fault line. I think there's many different shades. I would say millennials are probably more likely to be sex positive, pro-sex work. Zoomers probably are more conservative compared to millennials, but not necessarily as far as someone like Louise Perry or Mary Harrington. But I could be wrong. This is just sort of what I see, and as everyone's been discussing for the last decade, everyone's in an echo chamber, and things are curated by algorithms and what have you.
Right. One of my theses about culture, and I was saying this in reference, I know you had a debate with David Marks, who we're also going to have on the podcast at some point, who's an old friend of mine. And you guys were debating whether or not culture, like how creative and novel culture is. And I was saying, I actually think it's not possible to know anymore, because in the 80s and 90s or whatever, you could just look at popular music and film and TV, and you could look at these things. You could this mass stuff that everybody watched and listened to and consumed, or famous artists who displayed at the top galleries. You could have a general idea whether culture was getting stale. Now everything is hived off into subcultures. It's very compartmentalized, and I think that it's impossible to get a map of the landscape. So there can be incredible creativity in one pocket and incredible stagnation in another pocket. And it depends on your vantage point. It depends on which pockets you happen to be interacting with, because there's no, maybe AI will get good enough where it can survey all the pockets and sort of give us a good answer to this soon. But actually, we should just ask Claude or GPT about this. Is culture getting stale? I mean, it'll just, yeah. So I thought that was an interesting debate, because I think that it is impossible for me to know which one of you guys are right, because I can name you pockets. I can name you parts of the culture where David is absolutely right that culture has stagnated. And I can, I don't know, like a lot of, music. I would say music in general is pretty stagnant, but especially like rap music has stagnated in the last few years, and then rock music has stagnated for longer than that, and electronica has stagnated really badly. But then other places you see that are like, short video is just so much more wildly creative than it was before. People made short videos when I was a kid, but then, just the expansion. And I have this thesis that it's mostly technology driven. Now we have TikTok, but we all, music is stagnant specifically because when we exhausted the possibility of synthesizers and amplifiers, when we did and mixers, when we did all the things we could do with those fundamental technologies, then music stagnated a little, because we didn't keep inventing new technologies to make music. But then we invented new technologies to make short video, like TikTok, and so there was an efflorescence there. And so I think a lot of it's technology driven. but then it's just impossible for me to say whether this, constitutes an overall cultural stagnation or not, because everything is in its bubble now.
That's a good point. I mean, I think when people talk about whether culture is stuck, they focus on, what's left of the monoculture, what's gatekept. I think that there is a thirst for gatekept media, gatekept music, gatekept everything, right? Because we need some standard bearer, and it just doesn't. It still exists, but it's not as respected as it once was, and it maybe not as beloved as it once was. To your point about technology, I also think people don't learn their crafts, so they can't innovate because they don't understand the traditions that they're working in. Like there's like this axiom that all the best directors know everything there is about film, right? It doesn't mean that every cinephile is a great filmmaker, but all great filmmakers are cinephiles. And if you're working, with a surface level knowledge of music or whatever, you're not going to have enough knowledge to remix the past, right? There's that Girard essay that says all innovation is just remixing what came before you. And then to your point about technology, yeah, I think that's absolutely right. There are so many things we could do with music that we don't, or that very few people are doing, because we don't know enough about it, again, to push the envelope technologically. I always wondered why soundscapes or sound baths didn't take off, because there's a lot you can do there, right? I went to a sound bath 8 years ago now, where this musician replicated the feeling of being in a blizzard with sound, right? And he came pretty close, and that's pretty amazing. Who's to say the next, all right, we've moved beyond albums as a storytelling method. Maybe the next thing is some sort of immersive sound experience, and it doesn't have to be that. It's just one example of something that feels like it hasn't really been, explored. There's all sorts of things that we could be doing and we aren't, and probably because people don't even know it's an option.
We'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors. Our sponsor for today's episode is Carta, the end-to-end accounting platform that's purpose-built to power the strategic impact of the fund CFO. For the first time ever, private fund operators can now leverage their very own bespoke software that's designed from the ground up to bring their whole portfolio together, enabling formations, transactions, and distributions to flow seamlessly and accurately. The end result? A remarkably fast and precise platform that empowers better strategic decision-making and delivers transformational insights on demand, timely K1s, holistic fund performance data, and so much more. Come see the new standard in private fund management at carta.com/investors. That's carta.com/investors.
We talked a bit about feminism. I want to ask you a bit about the manosphere. I haven't checked in on what's happening in quite a while. Has the manosphere gotten bigger? Has it gotten more vulgar? What is sort of the trend line on sort of the male side of the gender war, in terms of how they communicate to other men, but also in terms of how they sort of interact with women?
I mean, I think with both sides of the divide, there's a lot of lowest common denominator content. It's so easy to create content. Internet's much bigger, so all these subcultures are very bloated. The same is true of the manosphere. It's just more a really big part of it is more people are trying to get attention, and we all know rage bait does very well, so they up the stakes, and everyone's finding any possible angle to galaxy brain their way into women oppress men or whatever thing. It's really sad, I think, because if you listen to early men's rights activists, even early pickup artists, I'd say up until the early 90s, so this is a time span from right after the sexual revolution to 1993 or something, they sounded very reasonable and very helpful. I saw a debate with, I think it was Herb Goldberg, who's an early men's rights activist, and maybe Susan Faludi, who wrote Backlash, which is a famous book about how whenever feminism history wins, there's a backlash, right? And it was just they both were so they both had respect for their own arguments and respect for each other. And they seemed to they seem to be truth seeking in a way that everyone's an entertainer now, and that's just not happening. Everyone wants to get people upset and hooked and, paying for their course or their supplement or whatever.
For their Substack, for their podcast.
Sure. Guilty as charged myself.
Eric, we need, more sponsors for this podcast. We have to be more controversial. Let's say controversial things.
Yeah, exactly. Well, is there a trend, sort of a trend line or a sort of through line between sort of the pickup artist community and Me Too, where the pickup artist community, taught nerds how to sort of hit on women, and it maybe taught them this idea that they could attract beautiful women because they saw some nerds do it, and maybe there's maybe women don't want to be hit on by nerds, and so there's sort of or is that too cute, or there's really no.
Where there is a through line is incels and pickup artists. The original incel communities were direct reactions to pickup artistry. I think Me Too, there's too much going on there. Pickup artistry is just too obscure, really, to have inspired that. Me Too, I think, was a confluence of different movements and trends, and we had sort of raunch culture in the early 2000s. There was the discourse around campus rape, and the media response to all of these things. I mean, there's just it was too big, and the landscape it was emerging from was too complicated to say that pickup artistry had much to do with it. Yeah, maybe insofar as we had this sort of sideshow, over the top sexist kind of thing, right? That these guys would get trotted out on Maury and Dr. Phil, right? But who took that seriously, really?
Right. Is Me Too kind of like the feminism end of history or something like that, just kind of won out, and there's not likely to be sort of great repudiation of Me Too? Or how do you sort of think about sort of sex norms a few years from now? Do you expect a pendulum swing back, or unclear?
I don't know. I mean, it depends. If we stay online and stay sort of antisocial, it just depends on where the broader culture goes. I don't think it is feminist end of history necessarily, though.
Is it likely that whatever Ayla represents, the sort of glorification of sex work, the sort of rational polyamory, specifically on the sort of sex positivity side, do you think that peaked a few years ago?
Oh yeah. I mean, but she's not even very well liked by those people because she's a little bit too out there. She's too libertarian. She asks too many questions. She's one of the only true originals that I could think of, because she's her own box in a way that not many people are.
True original right here. Okay.
Anyway. Exactly.
No, so here's another topic that I've been thinking about. Avoidant behavior, avoidant attachment. I've noticed a distinct trend among the young people that I see toward what I consider to be avoidant behavior. So like I said, the Gen X people, they were just impulsive people who had trouble controlling their impulses, maybe because of lead poisoning, or maybe just, I don't know why, but they were very horny and often violent, aggressive, and, would say intemperate things and just make bad decisions in life sometimes. And so controlling themselves was a big problem for these people. But then when I look at young people, I see a completely different set of problems. I see them, they're not having just a whole bunch of hookups with a bunch of random people. I mean, a few people are doing that, but it's not as common. Instead, what I see are people having these situationships, which are relationships where you're sleeping with someone occasionally, not, 5 times a week, whatever, but you're sleeping with them, once every couple of weeks, or once I don't know what. And but then they just have this person. They're oh yeah, we're in a situationship, and they never really think seriously about whether they want to, have some sort of emotional commitment, and that's their romantic life. And it seems casual because they're oh, we're just keeping it casual. It's not real. We're not defining a thing, blah, blah, blah. But it's not the same thing Gen X people did when they said we're keeping it casual. When Gen X people say we're keeping it casual, they just meant we're having a lot of sex, but we just, don't feel emotionally attached to each other. But then these people, it's almost it's like a relationship that failed to ignite. It's like a relationship that sort of putters along and kind of doesn't quite reach critical mass. And it's Jupiter failed to be a star because it wasn't big enough. It's sort of like that. It's, that's what I see. And I also see at the same time, a lot of people talking about, sort of using therapy speak as an excuse to say, ditch all your friends, ditch all the people in your life, cut off contact with everybody. Like that's a common thing you see people rant about on Twitter or other platforms. You see people say, just ditch them, avoid toxic people, cut them all out of your life. And that's an avoidant behavior as well. That's avoidant attachment style. And so I'm wondering, are we seeing a mass epidemic of avoidant attachment style among the youth? Or is this the availability heuristic? Am I just happening to see different people? Or is it overhyped? Or am I misidentifying it? What do you think about this?
I was thinking about that today. Like, there is this really, like, it's almost like smarmy or something. Like, I don't know. There's something, like, really annoying about it. Just, like, this inability to have difficult conversations. And so just sort of, like lying low, right? Like, if you're not outright ghosting someone, just sort of, like, waiting for, like, the conflict you made up in your head to blow over. And I think this is a very millennial thing too. I think this started with I think we're all roughly in the same age cohort, and it started with us. We were the first generation, and I don't know what causes it. It's like this fear, like there's this mass fear of like getting yelled at, even if you're not going to get yelled at. Like I'm going through like right now, like I have a friend who's just like not responding to my texts, and there's this like awkward energy, and I know she's like in a moment of retreat, and I'm like, did we have an argument that didn't register as an argument to me? I mean, you just see it with people all the time, right? And I can't explain it. Like some people have offered maybe we get too many notifications and it's like response to overstimulus. Some people say like, oh, if you were sent to daycare, this is yours. It's like I don't know what it is, but it's very annoying, right? And I think you're right that to point out that it's present in dating, but it's present everywhere.
Do we have a low T crisis or epidemic, or what's the right way of thinking about sort of testosterone and its sort of the state of it and its impact?
I mean, it seems like all the science says we do. And then, also sperm count is another thing to be concerned about. I would be thrilled for someone to say that this is fake, or that I would even be thrilled to find out that it's just like we're sedentary and obese and it's like a fixable problem, right? Like, Ozempic fixes this.
Ozempic fixes this. I love it.
Right? Like I would love to hear that.
Yeah. You alluded to it earlier in terms of like people not wanting to be conservative. Balaji likes to say that the Democrats and Republicans are almost like Sunnis and Shiites now. They don't like date. They don't sort of intersect.
Biology is hilarious. We need more biology on this podcast.
Very colorful. Are you seeing this sort of great sort of isolation or fragmentation in terms of people not wanting to date across a political party?
I think that one's not as bad as people say. I think people they on surveys it might reflect one way, but first of all, I don't think people are dating much at all, right? As we've discussed. But for the people who are dating, I think they're more willing to make concessions, even if they might not necessarily admit it. And I think there's mixed politics relationships all over the place.
Yeah, it is interesting. There's this white kid at University of Chicago who's very, like Daniel Schmidt, I think his name is very sort of like publicly aggressive about sort of, like race related topics. And he likes to post sort of images of his dating life to show, hey, see, I can be racist and people can like me. But there seems to be this broader, like what started as a joke, is like white boy summer, like identification of white identity that's like not exactly white nationalist, but not exactly not, and seems like playful, but and maybe just the fact that you can even say that in certain places just means there's been some shift. But my guess is it's largely a fringe and never really going to escape beyond a phrase. But Katherine, did you see any of that, or do you make any sense of this?
That people are softly white nationalist?
Yes.
On social media, sure, but I actually think in reality people are much less extreme on these topics, and being on the internet all day might suggest. Like I think even people who are posting like pretty out there like memes or whatever, or are saying also manner of racial slurs on Discord, or they probably wouldn't repeat those things in the physical world, not only because it's frowned upon, but because like they don't feel comfortable and these maybe don't reflect all of their beliefs. But whether or not people can talk about being like a white boy, I think that never went away. You see it on the left, a very popular like genre of tweet back when they were called tweets was like, playfully making, and not in the sort of like self-deprecating way that was a hallmark of wokeness, but like playfully making fun of the fact you're a white boy, or engaging with it, if not making fun of it. So I think that's sort of always been there, and it's always been okay and socially sanctioned.
Do you think that the sort of the stuff on the manosphere and the stuff in the feminism scene are getting more extreme, that make the most extreme versions of today, whether it's Andrew Tate or I don't even know who on the feminism side, kind of look tame a few years from now? Is there just this broader, you're sort of durable, sort of expanding the spectrum of what's allowed to say, or like, and do these polls seem to be just getting further and further apart due to sort of the internet? What will AI do for AI boyfriends, AI girlfriends?
It seems like this because this is what generates engagement. I think like we'll reach a breaking point where it's just too much, or at least I hope people are like, decide that it's just untenable. But I also say this, like, I can speak for millennials, and I have observations about Zoomers, but I don't know what Gen Alpha is going to be like. And Gen Alpha, they're teenagers now, and yeah, I'm interested to see how that plays out.
They don't know what they're going to be like either.
That's true. And there's some their internet culture is very extreme, and they're like, there's some weird stuff going on.
Where are they? TikTok?
TikTok, they're all over. They're all over the place. I'd say Discord, Roblox is another place.
Roblox.
Yeah, they're all over the place. I will say something that poses a problem for anyone who wants to observe these behaviors is, it is behind walls, right? It is a lot of things do take place in group chats and Discord servers, and areas that aren't as easily surveyable as Twitter.
I love it. The internet needs to be fragmented. Community moderation and the possibility of exit were the only things that kept the internet sane. And that one brief shining moment where everyone was just on Facebook and Twitter all the time in the mid-2010s sucked and led to a lot of bad things, I think.
Yeah. I think the internet should be more difficult to use, and that would fix a lot of our problems.
Let's just put up some barriers. What would make it more difficult to use?
Like even simple things, like it's harder to sign up for stuff. Like I don't like the idea of like age gating, but I think if you added like 2 more sign up pages to Twitter, like that would just start cutting people off, right? Like in a weird way, like I always hate when people like reply to my stuff with Urbit solves this, but it's just like too confusing and like a little bit too slow to be worth it to anyone except people who really want to be there.
I'll never forget the Noah quote, which is like, when you made it easy to give everyone a voice, don't be surprised if a lot of people say fuck you.
That's what most people want to say. They just want to say fuck you to someone. I mean, like, do you remember when you were a kid and you drove in the car with your parents, and then someone would go when it wasn't their turn at the stop sign, or cut someone off on the freeway or whatever, and the parents would just like yell like fucking asshole, or like, fucking Republican, or whatever they would say. Or that's what my parents said, but I imagine some people's parents probably said racial slurs. But my parents would just say fucking Republican. But then we took that and we turned that into mass culture. Like now people say that in public. They're just like, they're blowing off steam. They're annoyed at something. They're just like doing drive-by aggression. And then we turn that into our mass culture. And that was a mistake. That was not good.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I also think we took communities that were interesting and maybe not healthy, but they worked in their own weird way when they were very small, and blew them up. And now, there are certain things that should stay subterranean for the sake of people who are curious, and for the sake of people who belong in those communities. Like the example that gets given all the time is the kink community. Maybe it's not so bad to have a barrier to entry to get into that kind of stuff, instead of just like free for all, and you type something into, I guess now, ChatGPT and call it a day.
Right.
What about the trans topic? Are we peak the trans topic both in terms of sort of the pro and concerns about it, or do you think that will continue to be a sort of social media engagement bait machine?
I think it's become easier to talk about in some ways, and in some places, not everywhere, as the Jesse Single Blue Sky drama illustrates. That to me was very scary, the way he was treated on Blue Sky, because I feel like even if you have some kind of problem with his work, just like the death, it's like crazy. like immediately being.
You know, I lost friends over. I've talked to Jesse Single once, and it was for him to say some nasty shit to me.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's the only interaction I ever had with him. I'm like, I'm staying away from that guy because he's mean. But I've lost friends over Jesse Single because Jesse Single is on Substack, and in 2021, there like a bunch of people got like a bunch of lefties got, including some of my friends, got really mad at Substack. They were like, "This place is anti-trans. It's an anti-trans company." But look, they're platforming and paying this guy who's anti-trans. Of course, they weren't platforming and paying him, they were actually taking money away from him. But that's, if you don't understand the economics, Substack would give you an advance on future revenues, right? Like Matt Iglesias lost about $1 million or somewhere around $1 million from taking that deal. Like it was one of the worst financial deals of Matt Iglesias' life, which he didn't know that his blog would be so popular, right? It's basically they sell a form of insurance by giving you an advance on your future payments. That's basically what's going on. Anyway, I guess the point is that they got so mad at me for, and then I defended Substack and the economics of it. I was like, look, they're not actually paying people. They're just selling them incredibly overpriced insurance with this advance kind of thing that they're doing. And, you know, whatever. And then they got so mad at me that they never talked to me again.
Wow.
Yeah, I've always been sort of politically illegible to people. But I went on Blocked and Reported, which is Jesse Single's podcast, and I mean, I got booted from group chats and Discord servers. I lost longtime internet friends, but also friends in person. I mean, people were like furious. I'm still on all sorts of like weird, fuck this fascist turf, lists on, all sorts of social media sites because of this. And it's like, I mean, if that's the line, I don't know what to like. If at any time like I'm aligned too, I just know the person needs to just like go to prison. Like it's just so crazy. Like I'm sorry, my 500-word blog post about otherkins are, too crazy for you. You know what I mean? Like it's just crazy behavior. It's crazy. It's a crazy amount of policing.
Yeah. My political position on Jesse Single is that I want a world where I don't have to take a position on Jesse Single.
I think it's a good one. Yeah. I mean, yeah. It shouldn't be. He shouldn't inflame people this much. It's such an overreaction, and it's so scary.
Yeah, maybe if he's anti-trans, like I know anti-trans people. Wes Yang is anti-trans, and you know what? I don't have to like structure my social media habits and what platform I use and like how I live my life around those people. Like I don't want to do it. I don't have to do it. And if you think that like this is a war for the future of, like this is a civil rights movement for a vulnerable population, if you don't support it, you're like the people who just, equivocated on civil rights in the 50s and Berber. Like, okay, fine. Okay, whatever. Like, think that.
Yeah. Katherine, one of your most popular posts of all time on your blog, and this is also a plug of your great blog, is a master list of dating advice.
Oh yeah.
But it's locked, so readers can't see it. But so in order to, or readers who haven't paid for it can't see it. So in order to entice people to subscribe, but also, as we're talking about relationships, can you share a couple of nuggets from that article that you're perhaps most think are most non-obvious or interesting to and should be known among the broader public?
Man, I wonder which ones were there's some like that I always recommend, but let's see what I put there when I wrote it. I also it auto paywalled, so ordinarily it should be.
Oh, okay.
Let's see. Oh, well, here's a good one. Convoluted dating advice for men or women is always a grift. Don't let your romantic life become a product. So that was be direct, not desperate. He doesn't have narcissistic personality disorder. He wants to have sex and you're too available. It's a lot. It's like a list of how many did I put there? Like 71 points of common sense things that people like rarely talk about, because I think people, especially then, it was a little bit more popular then to just like come up with like the craziest, like, if he texts, if there's this amount of time between texts and like, uses a period, it means this. And I think even though there's 71 points there, dating is much simpler than the dating industry would want you to believe.
Yeah, that's really, I didn't read that post, but I agree completely. Like also this eternal question of like, what do women want? And the less often asked, but still irritating, what do men want? Like a large variety of different things. When you start to get to know people really well and find out what they actually want, it's like, it's insanely different. Like there's such a huge spread, both in terms of what people find attractive and how people like to have relationships, like what they want their relationships to be like, and all kinds of things. Like there's so much individual difference, and we downplay these. It's like what do women want is something I only could have like thought before I knew women. Once you actually have a few female friends, you're like, wait a second, okay, like people are incredibly different, and of course men are the same. That's the other thing. Like what men find attractive is just varies incredibly from man to man, and men won't necessarily admit that, and women won't necessarily realize it, and
that's where the point about the different dating markets comes into play, because what's attractive to a certain kind of guy in San Francisco won't be the same as what's attractive to some random guy in Houston, Texas.
My instinct that the trends that people complain about as it relates to dating apps, which is this idea of there's a lot of women chasing a few men, and that there's more women going to college than men, so there's not enough sort of eligible men, and that men and women are becoming more independent thanks to social media, OnlyFans, AI boyfriends, girlfriends, in the future sex robots. It seems like these trends will only continue, and it will just be harder and harder, or less pressures pushing men and women together. Are you guys similarly soft black-pilled on the topic, or are you encouraged that there will be a sort of a pendulum shift or a change in norms or behaviors or products that will sort of increase the marriage rate or dating rate even, or long-term relationship rate?
I'm maybe black-pilled on it. I have a young son, and I think all the time, like, what is it going to be like when he's of dating age? It kind of freaks me out. Scares the shit out of me, actually. I don't know. Who knows? I think the only thing people can really do is like build communities and try to surround themselves with people who share their values, and hopefully that helps the dating situation. I don't know. It seems pretty bleak for a lot of folks.
Yeah. With a couple minutes remaining, is there anything, I'm happy to wrap here, but is there anything we didn't yet get to that you think is important to leave our listeners with?
No, I don't think so. I think if I started listing off things, it would extend the time too much.
Yeah. Well, one thing I'll briefly say is you were early to sort of Tumblr as a sort of cultural and political influence. What's the Tumblr or influence, particularly on the left? People have been saying, we need a left Joe Rogan or whatever, like left sort of online culture. What's the version of that today, or what could you see that being?
I think we just saw that Twitter was very important, and I mean that's been true for a long time, but it continues to be very important. I'll say the trick for this is wherever journalists were, or wherever journalists were paying attention to was important. Now it seems like whoever has like the largest following. It's a difficult sort of metrics. It's not just journalists, really. You have to find where the cultural gatekeepers are, who they are, and where they hang out. During a period of time that was Twitter, during a period of time that was Tumblr. Now it's like not clear like who has the most powerful voice and where are they. We might be entering a digital dark age.
Yeah.
Anarchy. Digital anarchy.
Substack, maybe? I think Substack actually stands the best chance of any place of being the successor of important discourse.
Yeah. That's a good place to wrap. Katherine, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. The excellent blog is default.blog. You should follow Katherine at default_friend. Katherine, thanks so much for joining Noah and I.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Econ 102 is a podcast from Turpentine, the network behind Moment of Zen, In the Arena, The Cognitive Revolution, and more. If you like what you hear, subscribe and leave us a review in the App Store. You can keep up with both of our Substacks for written analysis of the topics we cover in the show at noahopinion.substack.com and erictornberg.substack.com. Thanks for listening.